Nadia Cole had exactly 11 minutes to get to the sanctuary gate before her shift started, and she was already using 9 of them arguing with a vending machine in the staff break room. The machine had taken her money, stared at her, and refused to release the granola bar she needed to survive the next 8 hours. She hit the side of it once, twice, then gave up and grabbed her kit bag from the bench, swung it over her shoulder, and walked out the door into air that smelled like pine trees and wet earth, and something wilder underneath both of those things. She had been working at the Ashford Wildlife Sanctuary for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of early mornings, long walks between enclosures, careful records, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being new somewhere that everyone else has worked at for years. She did not complain about this. Nadia Cole did not complain about most things. She wrote them down in a small notebook she kept in her coat pocket, thought about them for a few days, and then let them go. It was a system that had kept her moving through every difficult chapter of her 28 years. And she saw no reason to change it now. The sanctuary sat on the edge of the Ashford estate, which was owned by the Ashford family, and the Ashford family was, depending on who you asked, either an old and respected institution in this part of the country, or a collection of people who thought the rules of the world were suggestions that applied to everyone except them. Nadia had heard both versions before she arrived. She had decided to form her own opinion once she had more evidence. What she had, so far, was this. The estate was beautiful. The work was real and serious, and she was good at it. Her direct supervisor, a quiet woman named Claire Whitmore, treated her with the kind of respect that comes from watching someone work and deciding they know what they are doing. And the animals, the wolves especially, were extraordinary. 7 of them in the main sanctuary enclosure, 2 bonded pairs and 3 younger animals still finding their social positions. She had read all their files on her first night, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her small rented flat, with the folders spread around her, reading until her eyes burned. The 8th wolf was different. His name was Fenrir. He was silver-gray, large even by the standards of the breed, and he lived in a separate enclosure adjacent to the main one because he did not belong to the general population in any normal sense. He was what the older staff called a bonded wolf. This was not a term Nadia had encountered in her training, and when she looked it up in the sanctuary's own documentation, the language was careful and a little strange. A bonded wolf, the record said, was an animal that had formed an unusually deep connection with a specific human, not trained, not conditioned, chosen, in whatever way wolves choose things, which no one had ever fully explained to anyone's scientific satisfaction. Fenrir had chosen Cale Ashford. Nadia knew who Cale Ashford was the same way everyone in a 50-mile radius knew who Cale Ashford was. He was the head of the family. He was 34 years old. He had taken over management of the estate and the sanctuary 6 years ago after his father stepped back. He had, according to Claire, reorganized the entire operation, brought in new funding, improved the veterinary protocols, and generally made the place run the way it should have been running for years. According to Greta, the senior handler who had been at the sanctuary for 11 years and held strong opinions about nearly everything, Cale Ashford was also the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately became the room's main event, whether he intended to or not. Nadia had not met him yet. She had seen him once, from a distance, across the yard near the supply building. He was tall, dark coat, dark hair, the kind of posture that suggested someone who had spent a long time being looked at and had decided to simply stand still and let it happen. She had watched him for about 4 seconds before turning back to what she was doing, because she had a health check to finish, and 4 seconds was already more time than she had to spare. That morning, the morning that changed everything, she was scheduled to do a routine check on Fenrir. She had done checks on the 6 wolves in the main enclosure without incident. The animals knew her by now. They had not accepted her immediately, which was correct and appropriate. Wolves do not accept new people immediately. They watch. They test at the edges. They make you earn their attention slowly, the way anything worth earning is earned. By the end of her 2nd week, 3 of the 7 were comfortable enough to approach her directly. The other 4 watched from a distance but no longer moved away. She called this progress, and wrote it in her notebook and kept going. Fenrir was different. She went through the access protocol carefully. Claire had walked her through it on her first day and then again on her 3rd day, and again when Nadia asked for a 3rd review because she believed in getting things right before doing them, not after. She signed into the access log. She checked that the secondary gate was locked before opening the primary one. She had her kit bag over her shoulder and her clipboard in her hand, and her full attention on the enclosure ahead of her. Fenrir was lying near the far wall of the enclosure, his large head resting on his front paws, watching her with eyes the color of pale winter sky. She had read that he was calm with familiar staff, reserved with new ones, and had never shown any aggressive behavior in 6 years of records. She moved slowly anyway. You always move slowly. You never assume. She set her bag down near the center of the space and began the check. Coat condition, weight estimate from visual assessment. Gait as he rose to his feet and moved, which he did after she had been there for about 2 minutes, standing and stretching and looking at her with those winter sky eyes. She noted the things she needed to note. She watched him move. She spoke quietly, not to communicate anything specific, just to keep her voice in the air between them because most animals find continuous low sound more settling than silence. He came closer. She did not react. She kept writing. He stopped about 4 feet from her and stood there, and she continued writing, and then she looked up and said, quietly, "Hello?" The way you greet someone when you are not sure yet if they want to be greeted. He walked the remaining 4 feet and put his head in her lap. Not aggressively, not with any energy of demand. He simply walked forward and lowered his enormous head and rested it across her knees, the way a very large, very tired creature rests on something it has decided is safe. She felt the weight of him. She felt his breathing, slow and even. She felt the particular quality of stillness that had settled over the enclosure, which had been ordinary stillness before, and was now something else, something that had changed without any visible reason. She put her clipboard down. She did not fully understand what was happening. She would think about it later, many times, trying to find the right words. The best she could manage was this. It felt like something had decided something, and she had not been part of the deciding, and yet the decision was somehow about her. She completed the health check. She wrote her notes. She stayed for an additional 20 minutes because she was not sure what the protocol was for a situation that had no established protocol, and when in doubt, Nadia Cole gathered more information. Fenrir stayed with his head in her lap for the entire time, only lifting it when she began to pack her bag to leave. He followed her to the gate. This was unusual. She noted it. He sat outside the gate after she closed it and watched her walk across the yard. She turned once and looked back at him. He was still sitting, still watching. She turned back around and kept walking, and she felt the watching continue between her shoulder blades for the full distance to the staff building, the way you feel the presence of something very still and very focused even when you cannot see it. Claire was in the office when Nadia came in to file her notes. "How did the Fenrir check go?" Claire asked, not looking up from her own paperwork. "Fine," Nadia said. "Healthy, good coat, good movement. He came over to me." Claire looked up. "He came over to you?" "He put his head in my lap." There was a pause. Claire set her pen down. "He put his head in your lap?" "Yes." Claire looked at her for a long moment. "Has that happened to you before? With wolves?" "No," Nadia said. "I know it happens. I know bonding behavior exists. I just haven't seen it directed at me." "It's not," Claire said carefully. "Usually directed at new people." "I know." Another pause. Claire picked her pen back up and looked at the page in front of her without writing anything. "Write it up properly," she said. "All of it. Time, duration, behavior before and after. I want to have a full record." "I was going to," Nadia said. She sat at the desk in the corner and wrote everything down. She was precise. She used careful language. She reported what happened without interpretation, because that was the correct way to document animal behavior, and also because she was not yet ready to interpret it. Interpretation required time and more information, and she was always more comfortable when she had both. She sent the report to Claire. She sent a copy to the veterinary record system, and then, because protocol required it, she sent a summary to the estate's main contact for Fenrir's care. She addressed it to Cale Ashford, typed it professionally, and pressed send. She did not think about him reading it for the rest of the afternoon. Or rather, she thought about it twice, and caught herself both times, and redirected her attention to the afternoon feeding rounds, which needed doing, and were more useful than wondering about the expression on a man's face when he read an email she could not see him reading. At the end of her shift, she walked to her car. It was parked in the staff lot at the south end of the estate, a 5-minute walk from the main building. She had her bag, her jacket, her keys in her hand, and she was thinking about what to make for dinner when she heard footsteps behind her that were not footsteps at all. She turned around. Fenrir was walking behind her, not running, not urgent, just walking. The way you walk when you are going somewhere you intend to go. He was several feet behind her and slightly to the left, and his expression, if wolves have expressions, was one of calm certainty. He had gotten out of his enclosure. She did not know how. The enclosure was rated secure. She had closed both gates herself, and yet here he was, walking behind her toward the staff parking lot at the end of her shift, with the air of someone who had made a decision and was now acting on it. She stopped walking. He stopped. He sat. She looked at him for a long moment. "You can't come to my car," she said. He looked at her. "I'm serious." she said. He continued looking at her. She got out her radio and called Claire, and Claire called the handlers, and it took 4 people and 30 minutes to return Fenrir to his enclosure, during which time he was cooperative and calm and gave no indication of distress. He simply went where they guided him. He had gotten what he came for, which appeared to be the walk to the parking lot. He sat inside his enclosure after the gate was closed and watched the lot until her car was out of sight. She drove home. She made pasta. She sat at her kitchen table and ate it, and looked at the wall for a while. In her notebook, she wrote 3 words. What was that? She did not have an answer yet, but she had learned, over 28 years, that the most interesting questions were the ones that stayed with you past the first night, the ones that were still there in the morning when you woke up, waiting patiently, like something very large and very still sitting outside a gate. She went to sleep. She was back at the sanctuary at 6:45 the next morning. Fenrir was sitting at the staff gate when she arrived. She stopped walking. She looked at him. He looked at her. The gate was locked and he was on the inside of it and she was on the outside, which was the correct arrangement. And yet somehow it still felt like he had been waiting for her, which was the arrangement he had decided on, correctness or not. She signed in. She went through the gate. She did not make eye contact with him as she walked past, not because she was afraid, but because she needed a moment to decide what the correct professional response was to a wolf who had apparently rearranged his personal schedule around hers. She was halfway across the yard when she heard Claire's voice behind her. He was there at 5:30, Claire said, falling into step beside her. I came in early and found him sitting there. I have no idea how he knew your car wasn't here yet. He just sat and waited. Nadia did not say anything for a moment. I've never seen him do this, Claire said. In 11 years, I've never heard of him doing this. What does it mean? Nadia asked. Claire was quiet for a moment. I think, she said finally, that you should write another report. Nadia wrote the report. She was thorough. She cross-referenced the sanctuary's own behavioral documentation and 2 external sources she found in the veterinary database. She attached her notes from the previous day. She added a section at the end titled, Further Observation Required, because that was accurate, and also because she was not ready yet to use any of the other words that were beginning to form in the back of her mind. She sent the report to Claire. She sent it to the veterinary records system. She sent the summary to Cale Ashford. She was at her desk an hour later when a reply arrived. It was short. It said, I'll come by this afternoon. Thank you for documenting this. It was signed with his full name, which was the professional thing to do, and it told her nothing about his expression when he read it, which was the thing she was not thinking about, and therefore thought about for the rest of the morning. At 2 in the afternoon, Cale Ashford walked into the sanctuary's main building, and Nadia Cole was standing at the filing cabinet with a folder in her hand, and he said, You're Nadia Cole. And she said, Yes. And he said, I'm Cale Ashford. And she said, I know. And then there was a brief silence that could have been awkward, but was instead simply real, the way silences between 2 people who are noticing each other for the first time often are, before either of them has decided what to do about the noticing. Thank you for the reports, he said. It's my job, she said. Still, he said, thank you. He was tall, which she had already known from seeing him across the yard. Standing in the same room, he was also something else that she did not immediately have a word for. There was a quality to him that reminded her, and she recognized this was a strange thought, of Fenrir, a quality of stillness that was not passivity, a quality of attention that was not performance. He was looking at her the way people look at things they are genuinely trying to understand, not trying to impress, and she found this, unexpectedly, more difficult to stand still in front of than being looked at in the other way would have been. Can I see him? He asked. Of course, she said. He's your wolf. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a correction, not quite agreement. Something between the two. Come with me, he said, if you're free for a few minutes. She was free for a few minutes. She put the folder back in the cabinet and walked with him to Fenrir's enclosure. Fenrir was lying in the afternoon sun when they arrived. He raised his head at the sound of their footsteps. He looked at Cale, and his tail moved once, the kind of greeting that has warmth in it without urgency. And then he looked at Nadia, and he stood up. He walked to the fence. He pressed his nose against the wire and looked at her. Beside her, she heard Cale breathe in. She looked at the wolf, then at the man standing beside her. Cale was watching Fenrir with an expression she could not read and was not sure she had the right to try to read, not yet, not 3 weeks into a job, and 3 hours into knowing his name. He didn't do that yesterday? Cale asked. His voice was careful. Not at the fence, she said. He followed me. He came to me inside the enclosure. But at the fence, he just watched. He's watching you differently now, Cale said. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She watched Fenrir. Fenrir watched her. Cale stood beside her with his hands in his coat pockets, and she could feel him thinking in the way you feel another person's thoughts sometimes when you are standing close enough and paying enough attention. He's never done this, Cale said quietly. In 6 years. I know, she said. Claire told me. What do you think it means? He asked. She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her. She thought about her notebook and the 3 words she had written in it last night, and the fact that she still did not have an answer, but that the question was still there this morning, still waiting, still patient. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I think I need to find out. He nodded. He looked at Fenrir for a long moment, and then he looked at her, and there was something in that look that she did not examine, not then, but that she would think about later, on the drive home, in the quiet of her flat, in the brief space between putting her notebook down and turning the light off. Something that felt, without any clear reason, like the beginning of something. She did not write that in her notebook. Not yet. But the page was open, and the pen was in her hand. And outside, at the edge of the sanctuary grounds, a silver wolf sat in the last of the afternoon light and waited, with the patience of something that is already decided, for the rest of the world to catch up. The second report Nadia filed about Fenrir ran to 4 pages. She was thorough by nature and thorough by training, and she had also been careful, over the previous 2 days, to document every interaction she had with the wolf in real time, rather than from memory. Because memory reshapes things and she wanted the record to be clean. She used careful, neutral language. She described what happened, what she observed, and what the behavior could indicate according to the relevant literature. She included photographs taken during the observation window on Tuesday afternoon, when Fenrir had again stationed himself at the corner of his enclosure closest to the main building, which happened to be closest to her desk, which happened to be a coincidence she had stopped believing was a coincidence by Tuesday morning. She sent the report at 7:48 in the morning, and had a reply by 8:15. The reply said, I'd like to meet with you and Claire today, if you're both available. 11 o'clock, main office. It was signed Cale Ashford, and it was businesslike, and there was nothing in it that Nadia should have spent any time thinking about, which meant she thought about it 3 times between 8:15 and 11, before firmly stopping herself. The meeting was professional. Claire was there with her own notes. Cale sat across the table with his forearms resting on the surface and listened more than he spoke, which was, Nadia was beginning to notice, a thing he did often. He was not the kind of man who filled silences with words for the sake of filling them. He waited until he had something to say, and then he said it precisely, without ornament. She respected this. She also found it slightly unnerving in the way that anything very still can be unnerving when you are used to noise. They talked about the behavior. They talked about documentation. They talked about what the next step should be in terms of observation, and whether the attachment warranted any change in Fenrir's care protocol. Claire suggested a supervised approach and monitor period. Cale asked 2 precise, relevant questions. Nadia gave 2 precise, relevant answers. By 11:45 they had a plan, and Nadia had a new task. Structured daily contact with Fenrir, documented, observed by Claire in the first week, and then reviewed together. Does that work for you? Cale asked. Yes, Nadia said. It's straightforward. Good for the data. He nodded. He looked at her for a moment longer than the question required. Good, he said. She did not think about the extra moment on the drive home. She thought about it for a maximum of 4 seconds, and then put on the radio and thought about dinner instead. The structured contact began on Thursday. It was, by every professional measure, a success. Fenrir came to her immediately on entering the enclosure, settled beside her without any of the gradual trust building that should, by every known behavioral model, have still been in progress. He was not behaving like an animal still learning someone. He was behaving like an animal who had already decided, and was simply waiting for the humans around it to catch up to the decision. Claire stood at the enclosure fence with her clipboard and watched this happen. She wrote things down. She did not say much. Occasionally she made a sound that was not quite a word, the kind of sound a person makes when they see something that surprises them, and they are not ready to have a conversation about the surprise yet. On Friday, Fenrir brought Nadia something. It was a length of thick rope that had previously been part of one of the wolf enrichment toys in the enclosure. He carried it to her the way a dog carries a gift, with a kind of pride that was also a kind of offering, dropping it beside her feet and then sitting back and looking at her with those winter sky eyes. She looked at the rope, she looked at him. She said, "Thank you," because it seemed like the right response, and his tail moved in a slow arc that was not excitement but satisfaction. She photographed the rope. She documented it. She noted the time and the behavior and her response. She did not tell Claire about the feeling she had, looking at that rope on the ground, which was something between amusement and a kind of gentle bewilderment, the feeling of being genuinely surprised by something in a world where she had begun to believe she had seen enough of things to stop being surprised by them. She kept that part for herself. On Saturday, Cale came to the enclosure again. She was in the middle of the observation period when he arrived, standing at the gate watching her. She noticed him the way you notice something at the edge of your vision without looking directly at it. He had his coat on. His hands were in his pockets. He was watching Fenrir, who was lying beside Nadia, with his head on her knee. She waited until the observation window was complete before she acknowledged him. Then she looked up. "I didn't know you were coming by." "I didn't either," he said. She did not know what to do with that, so she did nothing with it, and instead looked back at her clipboard. "He's been consistent," she said. "Every session." "I can see that," Cale said. There was a pause. Fenrir had raised his head at the sound of Cale's voice, and he looked between them, from the man at the gate to the woman at his side, and his gaze settled back on Nadia with a quality that could only be described as choosing. "He looks between us like he's comparing something," Nadia said. She had not meant to say it. It came out before the thought was fully formed. "What do you think he's comparing?" Cale asked. She thought about it. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm projecting." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe not." She looked up at him then, properly, not just a glance. He was looking back at her with that quality of attention she was beginning to recognize. The one that was not performance. The one that felt like it cost him something to give and was given anyway. She looked back at Fenrir. "How long has he been with you?" she asked. "Since he was 3 months old," Cale said. "He was the smallest of his litter. The mother wasn't strong enough to feed all of them. We supplemented. I was there for a lot of it. He just decided, at some point, that I was his. I don't think I had a lot of say in it." Nadia looked at the wolf beside her. "That sounds familiar," she said. Cale did not answer immediately. She heard him move, a small shift of weight, and she was aware of him in the peripheral way, that you are aware of things that have begun to take up space in your attention without your full permission. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "The attachment?" She considered this honestly. "No," she said. "It surprises me, but it doesn't bother me." "That's unusual," he said. "Most people find it a little overwhelming when he chooses them. The staff here have always kept a professional distance. He's never pressed for more than that with anyone." "Until now," she said. "Until now," he said. She closed her clipboard and stood up slowly, not wanting to disturb Fenrir more than necessary. He lifted his head and watched her rise, then settled again when she remained close. She looked at Cale through the fence. "Do you know why he does it?" she asked. "Why he bonds the way he does? The original behavioral reports I read say it was spontaneous. But spontaneous is just the word we use when we don't have an explanation." Something almost moved through his expression. "I've read a lot of research on it," he said. "I've talked to behavioral specialists. Every one of them eventually says the same thing." He paused. "That some animals recognize something in certain people that the animal understands and the person doesn't. Not yet." She held his gaze. "What do they recognize?" "Safety," he said. "Not safety like nothing will hurt you. Safety like—" He stopped. He seemed to consider the right words the way she had seen him consider questions before, not rushing toward an answer, but finding the right shape of one. "Like you are exactly what you appear to be," he said. "Like there is no difference between what you show and what you are." She absorbed this. She thought about herself. She thought about 28 years of deciding to be consistent, to be honest, to be the same in rooms where it cost her, as in rooms where it didn't, and she thought about how that decision had not always been easy, and how she had made it anyway, and how she had never quite known whether it was a strength or just a habit. "That's a lot to attribute to a wolf's instinct," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at Fenrir. Fenrir looked at her. She thought. And yet. The following week was the one that Greta decided to make a project of. Greta Marsh had been at the Ashford Sanctuary for 11 years, which was long enough to know everything about everyone, and to have opinions she did not keep to herself if she judged they were opinions worth sharing. She was 53, stout, with short gray hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and took off dramatically whenever she was making a point. She had decided, somewhere in Nadia's first week, that Nadia was worth the effort of knowing, and she had pursued this goal with the same focused energy she brought to everything else. "He came by again yesterday," Greta said on Monday morning, leaning against the counter in the break room with her tea mug and the expression of someone delivering news they find extremely interesting. "Who?" Nadia asked. knowing who. Cale, Greta said in the tone of someone who does not need to use the full name. He came to see the Fenrir check. You'd already gone home. He stood at the enclosure for a few minutes, then left. She sipped her tea. He doesn't usually come by twice in 1 week. He's monitoring the situation, Nadia said. Right, said Greta in a tone of voice that meant she thought this was technically accurate and entirely not the point. Nadia poured her coffee and said nothing else. She was good at saying nothing else, when the something else she wanted to say was not ready yet. But the week continued, and each day brought Cale Ashford once to the sanctuary grounds, and each time it was professionally appropriate, and each time there was a reason, and each time the reason got slightly thinner. On Monday it was a facilities review. On Tuesday it was a question about Fenrir's diet records. On Wednesday it was to look at a report he could have read in his office. On Thursday there was no stated reason at all. He simply appeared at the enclosure while she was finishing the observation session, and Fenrir looked between them again, and Cale said, "How was today?" And she said, "Good. Consistent." And they stood on opposite sides of the gate for a few minutes talking about nothing much, and it was, she admitted to herself on the drive home, not a hardship. On Friday, Greta appeared in the doorway of Nadia's office with a marker in her hand and the look of someone about to make an artistic statement. "I've been keeping a record," Greta said, "of his reasons for visiting." She went to the whiteboard on the office wall, the one Nadia used for scheduling, and wrote at the top of it, in large letters, "Reasons for today's visit." Beneath that she wrote, Monday, facilities review. Tuesday, diet records. Wednesday, paper he could have emailed. Thursday, nothing. Friday, TBD. She put the marker down and looked at Nadia with great satisfaction. Nadia looked at the board. She looked at Greta. She picked up the eraser and removed the entire thing. Greta left. Nadia heard her, in the corridor, draw the board back on the break room wall where it apparently lived originally, which Nadia had not known. By Monday morning the list had 2 new days added, and 2 people from the handler team had added stars beside Wednesday's entry. Nadia did not erase it from the break room. This was partly because it was the break room and not her office, and she had limited authority over what went on the break room walls, and partly, if she was honest, and she tried always to be honest, because something about its existence did not make her feel the way she had expected it to make her feel. She had expected to feel irritated, or embarrassed, or concerned about what it implied in a professional context. She felt none of these things. She felt something else, something quieter and less familiar, something she recognized as the sensation of a situation developing in a direction she had not planned for, and finding, to her own moderate surprise, that she was not particularly afraid of it. She was aware that this was unusual for her. She was aware that Fenrir knew something she did not. She was aware that Cale Ashford kept finding reasons to be somewhere near where she was working. She was aware that the whiteboard in the break room was now what Greta called a historical document, and what the 2 handlers called essential reading. And she was aware that somewhere in the middle of all of this, between the morning gate-sitting and the rope-carrying and the careful words through a chain-link fence about what wolves recognize in people, something had begun that was not in any of her plans, and was not in any of her notebooks, and was not explained by any of the reports she had been so carefully filing. She sat at her desk on Friday afternoon with her notebook open and her pen in her hand, and she thought about it properly for the first time, instead of around the edges of it. She thought, Fenrir chose me before I chose anything. She thought, that kind of beginning is either exactly right or very complicated. She thought, possibly both. She wrote in her notebook, still gathering data. She closed the notebook and went back to work. Outside the window, across the yard, a silver wolf was sitting in the sun with his face turned toward the building, patient and certain, and entirely unconcerned with the fact that his decision was currently creating a situation that 2 adults, one experienced veterinary assistant and one very capable estate manager, were both too careful and too honest to talk around much longer. Fenrir had all the time in the world. He could wait. It was Cale who first said out loud that it was not working. Not the situation with Fenrir. That was working perfectly, which was the problem. What was not working was his attempt to treat the situation like a problem he could solve by applying the right resources in the right order. He was good at solving problems. He had spent 6 years building that competency, identifying what was wrong and methodically fixing it, and it had served him well in every area of his life. The estate ran well. The sanctuary ran well. His relationships with staff, with the broader community, with the various organizations connected to the Ashford name, were professional and respected and without complication. He was not good at things that could not be fixed by identifying what was wrong. He stood in his study on Saturday morning with a report in his hand. A printed copy of Nadia's most recent behavioral documentation on Fenrir, and he read it 3 times. Not because the information was unclear. The information was very clear. Nadia Cole wrote with precision and an unusual kind of honesty, not just recording what happened, but questioning her own interpretations at every point, noting where her observations could be read multiple ways, where the evidence was insufficient to support a conclusion she might be inclined to reach. He had read dozens of behavioral reports over the years. He had not read one quite like hers. He put the report down and looked out the window at the grounds. He had told himself he was going to the sanctuary each day for professional reasons. He had believed this, mostly, for the first 3 days. By Thursday he had stopped believing it, and started going anyway, which was a different kind of choice, and one he was not entirely comfortable with, because it was the kind of choice that comes before a decision, and he was not ready to make the decision. The decision being that Fenrir was not the only one who had decided something, and that the deciding had happened faster than he was prepared for and without his permission, which was, he thought, a thing that either meant he was paying attention to the wrong things, or that some things did not wait for you to be ready. He went to the sanctuary. It was a Saturday, which meant Nadia was on the reduced weekend rotation, which he had checked and then been irritated at himself for checking. She was doing a morning observation, Claire had told him when he asked, again with the specific kind of casualness that told him Claire was watching this situation with the attention she brought to everything that mattered in the sanctuary. He found Nadia at the large enclosure, not Fenrir's but the main one, doing a general check on the 6 wolves of the primary pack. She had a clipboard and she was moving methodically along the perimeter, pausing to observe each animal, making notes with the focused efficiency of someone who was entirely comfortable in the work and not thinking about anything else. He watched her for a moment from the far side of the yard. She had not seen him yet. Fenrir had, from his adjacent enclosure, and was tracking Nadia's movement along the fence line of the main enclosure with his head turning slowly, following her the way a sunflower follows light, steadily and without apparent effort. Kale looked at his wolf and thought, yes, I know exactly how you feel. He crossed the yard. Nadia heard his footsteps and turned, and there was a brief moment, less than a second, where her expression was unguarded, and what was in it was not professional neutrality. It was something warmer and less managed, and it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual composed directness. But he had seen it, and he filed it away alongside all the other things he was filing. Saturday, she said, not a scheduled visit. No, he agreed. I wanted to check on the main pack. There was a note in the records about the younger female. She looked at him in the particular way she had of looking at things she was not yet sure she believed. Sylvie, she said. She's fine. I checked her first. The note was from 2 weeks ago and the issue resolved itself by the following day. Right, he said. You could have read that in the updated records, she said, from your office. I could have, he said. A pause. He was aware of Fenrir watching them from the adjacent enclosure. He was aware of the morning light. He was aware that he had run out of professional reasons to be standing in this particular part of the grounds at this particular time, and that Nadia Cole was too precise and too honest a person to pretend she hadn't noticed. Kale, she said. He looked at her. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I'd like you to answer it honestly. All right, he said. Is there actually anything you need from me today, professionally speaking? He thought about lying. He thought about it for exactly the time it took him to look at her face, at the directness in it, at the absence of any maneuvering, at the person who had written 4 pages of behavioral notes that questioned her own conclusions at every turn, because she believed in accuracy above comfort. He thought about lying for 1 second and then discarded it. No, he said. She nodded. Something in her settled. Not relaxation exactly. More like the particular quality of a person who has just confirmed something they already suspected, and can now proceed with full information. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Okay, she said again. I'd rather know the truth. It's easier to work with. He looked at her. He thought, I know. That is the thing about you. I've been handling this badly, he said. You've been handling it the way most people handle something they're not sure what to do with, she said. You've been finding reasons to be near it without admitting that you're near it for a reason. He was quiet for a moment. That's an accurate summary. I tend toward accurate, she said. Occupational habit. I know. A pause. I've been reading your reports. All of them? All of them, he said. Multiple times. There. He looked for the right word. They're honest in a way I'm not used to. She looked at him. Reports should be honest. Yes, he said. They should. They frequently aren't. People tell you what they think you want to hear, or what makes the situation look managed. or what keeps things from being complicated. You tell me what is actually happening, including the parts that don't have good explanations yet. She considered this for a moment. Including the parts that don't have good explanations yet, she said. That's important. The absence of explanation isn't the same as the absence of meaning. No, he said, it isn't. The morning light had shifted and was now coming in at an angle that meant he had to adjust his position slightly or be looking directly into it. He adjusted. She watched him do it. There was something in the moment that was very ordinary and very specific and would, he thought, be entirely unremarkable to anyone watching, except that it was also, somehow, the most comfortable 2 minutes he had spent in a professional context in a long time, which was a deeply strange thing to notice about a conversation he had been dreading having. I don't know what to do about any of this, he said. He did not usually say that. He was the kind of person who knew what to do, or at minimum said he was working on it. Saying he did not know felt, unexpectedly, like putting something heavy down. I don't either, she said. But I think not knowing is the honest place to be right now, and I'd rather be in the honest place. Even when it's uncomfortable? He asked. Especially then, she said. Fenrir made a sound from the adjacent enclosure. Not a bark. Not quite. The low sound that wolves make when they are marking attention, when they want something noted. They both turned to look at him. He was standing at the fence closest to them, his large silver head slightly lowered, watching them with those pale winter eyes, and an expression that was, if you were the sort of person who read things in animal expressions, deeply satisfied. He's been doing that more, Nadia said. Making that sound when you and I are both near. I noticed, Kale said. He has an opinion about us, she said. He's had it from the beginning, Kale said. He looked at Fenrir for a long moment. The wolf looked back. There was something between them, the weight of 6 years, of early mornings and long winter nights, and the specific wordless understanding that forms between a person and an animal when both of them have decided to be fully honest with each other. He doesn't question his own judgment, Kale said quietly. He just acts on it, immediately, without, he paused, without the process. The process, she said. The thinking, and the weighing, and the waiting, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I do a lot of that, she said. The thinking and the weighing. I know, he said. I've been reading your notes. She almost smiled. He saw it at the corner of her mouth, the beginning of it, and it did to him what he had been pretending for 2 weeks it wasn't doing to him, which was a very inconvenient piece of honesty that he was now apparently committed to. The notes are the thinking and weighing in document form, she said. I find that very easy to understand, he said. I do the same thing, just in my head. More private that way, she said. Usually more comfortable, he said, not always more accurate. A pause. The morning moved around them, the ordinary sounds of a place at work, bird noise from the tree line, the distant sound of a handler doing the western perimeter check. The particular silence of the main enclosure where the 6 wolves were watching the 2 humans at the fence, with the mild curiosity of creatures who have no stake in whatever the humans are negotiating. Fenrir made the sound again. I think he wants us to stop talking around it, Nadia said. He's been wanting that for 2 weeks, Kale said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The distance between them, which was the width of a conversation, and the width of a fence, and the width of 2 people who were both careful, and both honest, and both therefore aware that what was happening between them was real, and not something either of them had manufactured, felt like it had narrowed slightly, not physically but in some other way, the way distances narrow when 2 people stop pretending not to feel them. I'm not good at this, he said. He needed her to know that, the same way she needed everything to be accurate. I'm good at work. I'm good at decisions I can think through. This. He looked at Fenrir, then back at her. I'm not practiced at this. I'm not either, she said. I tend to overthink until the moment passes. Does this moment feel like it's passing? He asked. She considered him. She was doing the thing she did, the honest evaluating, looking at the thing in front of her and deciding what was true about it, without letting what she wanted to be true get in the way. He waited. He had learned, in 2 weeks of watching her, that she was worth waiting for. No, she said finally. It doesn't. He nodded. Something in him settled, not excitement, not the particular electric urgency of a beginning, but something quieter and more solid than that. The feeling of something confirmed that he had already, at some level, known. Good, he said. Because I don't want it to pass. She did not answer immediately. She looked at Fenrir, who was still at the fence, still watching, still in possession of the particular satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for 2 people to catch up, and has just seen them close the gap slightly. I'm still gathering data, she said. He almost smiled. I know, he said. Take your time. She looked back at him. You're not going to stop coming by, she said. No, he said honestly. I'm not. Good, she said. And there it was again, the corner of the smile. And this time it got a little further before it settled back into composure. Because I've noticed I'm watching for the car. He looked at her. She looked back, composed and direct and entirely without performance. The exact same person at this fence as she was in every document she had written, which was, he thought, either very rare or the most natural thing in the world, and he was no longer sure there was a difference. Behind the fence, Fenrir turned in a small circle and lay down in the sun. He had heard enough. He was done waiting for the confirmation he had already been certain of. Some decisions were not difficult when you knew how to read what was in front of you. He had always known how to read what was in front of him. He just wished the two humans he was fond of were half as efficient at it as he was. He put his head on his paws and let the morning warm his fur, and decided, in the uncomplicated way he decided everything, that things were going in the right direction. It was about time. The whiteboard in the break room had, by the end of Nadia's 4th week, become something of an institution. Greta had stopped calling it the tally. She called it the archive. She had added a second column titled plausibility rating, and graded each stated reason for Cale's visits on a scale that ran from technically possible to come on. The handler team, 2 young men named Owen and Pete who had been at the sanctuary for 2 and 4 years respectively, had contributed annotations in a smaller hand. Claire had seen the board on Tuesday, read it in its entirety without expression, and then added one line at the bottom in her own handwriting that said, "Observed duration of visits trending upward, week over week." She had underlined it. Nadia saw this on Wednesday morning when she went to the break room for coffee. She stood in front of the board and read the entire thing, which took about 3 minutes because there was a significant amount of information now and some of it had footnotes. She stood there with her mug and read it and did not erase anything. Owen came in while she was reading. He poured his coffee without comment. He stood beside her and looked at the board. "We added Tuesday's visit last night," he said, in the tone of someone providing useful administrative information. Claire timed it. 19 minutes, new record. "Thank you, Owen," Nadia said. "We try to keep it current," he said. She looked at him. He looked at the board. He had the particular expression of a young man who is trying extremely hard to look like he is not finding a situation very funny. She respected the effort, if not the success. "You know," she said, "that this is a professional workplace." "Absolutely," he said. "And that kind of thing," she said, nodding at the board, "has implications for the professional atmosphere." "Completely understood," he said. "That's why Claire dated all of her entries, for the record." She looked at the board again. Claire's additions were indeed dated with the kind of careful precision that suggested someone who wanted their contribution to be clear and attributable. Nadia thought about this. She thought about the fact that Claire, who had worked at the Ashford Sanctuary for 11 years and who treated every aspect of her professional life with serious attention, had not only looked at the board but had added to it. That told her something. She poured her second cup of coffee and went back to her office. She sat at her desk and thought about what it meant that the people around her, who were all paying close attention in the way people pay close attention to things happening in a contained community, were not alarmed by what they were seeing. They were not concerned. They were not, as far as she could read, doubtful. They were recording it with a mixture of affection and amusement that suggested they found it, on balance, a good development. She thought about this in relation to what she knew about Cale Ashford, which was expanding week by week. She had learned things in the easy, gradual way you learn things about a person you see every day, not through formal information gathering but through observation. She had learned that he arrived at the estate before any of his staff, always, and left after most of them. She had learned that he remembered names, not just of staff but of the animals, their histories, their individual behavioral patterns. She had learned that when he was uncertain he said so, without apology, and then went and found the answer, and that the finding of the answer was thorough in the way that her own answer finding was thorough. She had learned that he made people feel steady when he was in a room, not because he performed steadiness but because he seemed to be genuinely settled inside himself, the way very few people are genuinely settled, and it communicated outward without effort. She had also learned, from things people said in passing, that the last 3 years had not been easy ones. There had been a legal dispute with a neighboring landowner over water rights, resolved but costly. There had been a difficult winter the year before that had put 2 of the wolves in serious medical situations. There had been a broader funding crisis in the wildlife conservation sector that had required Cale to spend 6 months personally rebuilding 3 major donor relationships that had collapsed. He had done all of this, as far as Nadia could tell, without losing his composure and without asking anyone to carry more than their share. She thought about what he had told her at the fence. about being good at decisions he could think through, about not being practiced. She thought about what it took to say that, to a person you barely knew. To say, here is a thing I find difficult, here is an edge of myself I do not trust, here is the truth. She had been asked before, by people who found her manner too contained, why she didn't give more away. She always had trouble answering because she did not think of herself as contained. She thought of herself as careful. There was a difference. Contained meant keeping things in because you were afraid of what would happen if they got out. Careful meant choosing the right moment and the right person and the right words, because the things worth saying deserve to be said well. She was beginning to think that Cale Ashford understood this distinction in his bones. On Thursday, Fenrir escaped again. This was the second time. The first had been the day he followed her to the parking lot, which now felt like a long time ago and was in fact only a month. This time the security team had a better understanding of how he was doing it, which involved a section of the fence that was rated for significantly larger animals and was, they had now discovered, not quite as secure as the rating suggested when the animal in question was highly motivated and had excellent spatial problem solving. He did not go to the parking lot this time. He went to the main building. More specifically, he went to the corridor outside Nadia's office. He was there when she arrived at 7:48, sitting in the corridor with his back against the wall and his legs stretched out in front of him in the way of a creature that has found a comfortable spot and intends to stay in it. The corridor was not very wide. He took up most of it. She stood at the end of it and looked at him, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who has arrived early and is pleased about it. "You can't be in the building," she said. He appeared entirely unconcerned by this information. "You know that," she said. "You've been inside a building before. The rules haven't changed." He looked at her door. He looked back at her. She got out her radio and called the handlers. Owen arrived first, then Pete, then Claire, who appeared in the corridor doorway at the far end, looked at Fenrir, looked at Nadia, and looked at her watch. 7:52, Claire said. "Not helpful," Nadia said. "For the archive," Claire said. The process of returning Fenrir to his enclosure was conducted with the same calm cooperation he always offered in these situations, which was to say he did not resist, did not protest, and went where he was guided without trouble. He also made it take as long as it possibly could without technically being uncooperative, which involved stopping to investigate 3 different things in the yard and sitting for nearly a full minute near the main building door while Owen waited patiently, and Pete tried not to visibly lose his composure. Nadia watched from the door. She watched Fenrir sit in the yard looking back at her building with the patient certainty of someone who is not leaving because he is being told to leave but because he has determined that the leaving is acceptable for now. She went back to her desk. She had emails to answer. One of them was from Cale, time-stamped 6:21 in the morning, asking if she had time to look at the new health protocol draft before Friday's meeting. She answered it professionally. She added a note at the end that said, "Fenrir was in the building this morning when I arrived. Corridor outside my office. He went back without incident, but the fence situation needs to be reassessed." She sent it and went back to her other emails. His reply came 12 minutes later. It said, "The fence is being assessed this afternoon. I'm sorry about the disruption." And then, after a space, "Was he there long?" She smiled at her screen. She was not aware of smiling until after she was already doing it. She replied, "I don't know. He seemed settled. He may have been there a while." His reply, "He knows your schedule." She sat with that for a moment. Then she typed, "I know. It's in the report." His reply, "I know it is. I wasn't pointing it out for your benefit. I was processing it for mine." She read this twice. She thought about the person who would write that sentence, the particular honesty of it, the willingness to say, "I am still working through this." Not performed uncertainty, real uncertainty, offered plainly, the way she offered her own. She typed, "How's the processing going?" A pause, longer than his previous replies. She imagined him at his desk. She did not usually permit herself to imagine people at their desks, but she made an exception. His reply, slowly, accurately. She typed, "Good. That's the right way." She sent it and turned back to her work, and the morning continued. And she was, she noticed, in a significantly better mood than she had been before the emails, which was information she filed alongside everything else she was collecting, without comment, without conclusion, the way you hold a piece of evidence when the case is still open, and you want to be sure you're seeing it clearly before you decide what it means. That afternoon, Owen came to her office doorway and stood there with the expression of someone who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. "What?" she said without looking up. Claire wants to know, he said, whether you need the formal behavioral documentation updated to include the in-building incidents, or whether you're managing those separately. Formally, she said, everything in one place. Right, he said. He didn't move. She looked up. Is there something else? He thought about it for a moment. Owen was 26, and honest, and slightly awkward about situations that required more social delicacy than he was used to managing. She found this endearing, though she did not say so because she was his senior colleague, and there was a professional line. I just wanted to say, he said, that everyone thinks it's good. What's happening? Fenrir and everything. She looked at him. He's been here 6 years, Owen said, and he's never done this. He's never chosen anyone outside of Kale. And the way Kale... He stopped. He was searching for language. Kale takes the estate seriously, he said finally. He takes everything seriously. He's a good person. And he's been very... Another pause. Focused, Owen said. On work. For a long time. And everyone thinks it's good that he's... Owen appeared to run out of words. Coming by. He finished. More. Nadia considered him. She thought about what it meant that the person who had been most careful not to say anything too overt was Owen, who was not known for his subtlety. Thank you, Owen, she said. Claire told me to tell you, he said. Of course she did, Nadia said. He left. She turned back to her desk, and she looked at her notebook, which was open to the current page, and she looked at the words she had written that morning, when she arrived, and found Fenrir in the corridor. She had written only 4. He knew I was coming. She looked at those 4 words for a long time. Then she wrote beneath them. They all did. And beneath that, after a pause, maybe I did too. She closed the notebook. She went back to her work. The afternoon light moved across the floor, and outside the window the ground settled into evening, and somewhere on the other side of the estate, in a study where a man was going through funding reports with one part of his attention, and using the other part on something entirely different and entirely unrelated to funding reports. Her last email was being read for the 3rd time. Slowly, accurately, the right way. The walk started because of the behavior report. Nadia had written, in the 5th week's documentation, that Fenrir's attachment behavior was beginning to show signs of what she called directional expansion. By this, she meant that his focus on her was no longer limited to proximity, to being in the same space or at the fence nearest her office. He was tracking her movement through the grounds. He moved through his enclosure when she moved through the yard, staying as close to her path as the fence allowed. When she was inside the building, he oriented toward the windows he could see from his enclosure. When she was at the main pack enclosure, working with the other 6 wolves, he watched from a distance and did not lie down until she was done. The behaviorist Claire had consulted. An external specialist named Dr. Helen Ford, who had worked with bonded animals for 20 years, reviewed the documentation and said that the pattern was consistent with a deepening primary attachment in a highly social animal, and that the most productive response was not to attempt to reduce the attachment, which rarely worked and often caused distress, but to provide structured, regular engagement that gave the animal clear signals of reciprocal commitment. In plain language, Fenrir needed to know she was not going anywhere. Dr. Ford also noted, in a brief call with Claire that Claire summarized in her meeting notes, that in her experience bonded animals of this type tended to show improved behavioral stability when their chosen person had a settled and consistent presence not just in the work context, but in the broader social environment of the animal's world, by which she meant Fenrir would do better if Nadia was not just the veterinary assistant who did the health checks, but a genuine presence in his daily life. Claire presented this to Nadia on a Tuesday morning. She presented it factually, without editorializing, which meant she read the relevant section of her meeting notes aloud in the tone she used for professional discussions. Nadia listened. She asked one clarifying question. Claire answered it, and then there was a pause in which both of them sat with the information. She's recommending I walk with him, Nadia said. Daily, Claire said, at minimum. Outside the enclosure, on the lead, through the grounds. With the handler team present for the first week, Nadia said. For the first week, Claire confirmed. After that, depending on how the behavior tracks, probably reduced to periodic supervision. And someone needs to be there for the first walks, Nadia said. Protocol requires an experienced handler and a secondary. Yes, Claire said. And, she paused. Kale typically accompanies Fenrir's off-lead periods. It's part of the bonded pair management protocol. The wolf is calmer when he's present. Nadia absorbed this. She looked at Claire's meeting notes, which were on the table between them and were very thorough. Of course he does, she said. Claire did not say anything. Send me the full protocol, Nadia said. I'll review it today. The protocol was 8 pages. She read all of it before noon and emailed 3 clarifying questions to Dr. Ford, who replied within an hour and whose answers were comprehensive and professionally impressive. By 2 o'clock, Nadia had read everything twice, written her own notes, and accepted that the first walk was scheduled for Thursday morning at 7:30. She thought about it on Wednesday night, sitting in her flat with her notebook, and she thought about it fairly thoroughly, which is to say, she thought about the wolf and the behavior and what the walk was intended to accomplish professionally. And she also thought about the fact that the walk would involve Cale Ashford in the grounds in early morning light, and approximately 40 minutes of time with no professional agenda, which was different from the structured meetings and the enclosure checks and the emails, which all had clear purposes. She was not certain how to categorize 40 minutes of walking. She wrote in her notebook, "A walk is a walk." She looked at that and then wrote below it, "And sometimes it isn't." She closed the notebook and went to sleep earlier than usual. Thursday morning was cold and clear, the kind of morning that happens in late autumn when the sky is pale blue without clouds and everything has a sharp edge to it, every leaf and branch and line of fence standing out against the light, as if someone has traced all the edges of the world in ink. Nadia arrived at 6:55, which was earlier than she needed to be. She told herself this was because she wanted to check on the main pack before the walk. This was true, and it was also not the whole truth. She was at the main enclosure when she heard footsteps behind her, and she turned, and Cale was crossing the yard in the direction of Fenrir's enclosure, with a long lead in his hand and his coat collar turned up against the cold. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, and they both stopped for a fraction of a second before continuing in their respective directions, which was completely natural, and not at all the behavior of 2 people who had been thinking about the same morning. Owen arrived at 7:20 with Pete, and they did a perimeter check of the walk route, which took the agreed path through the eastern grounds, along the tree line, and back around through the lower meadow. The route had been chosen because it avoided the main public access paths, which were not in use this early, but which the protocol specified should be kept clear during bonded animal exercises. At 7:30, Fenrir came out of his enclosure. He was magnificent in the morning light, that was the only word for it. The silver gray of his coat caught the low sun, and he moved with the particular fluid ease of a large animal fully at home in its body, his head high, his breath misting in the cold air. He was on the lead, attached to Cale, and he walked beside Cale the way bonded animals walk, not pulling, not straining, simply moving alongside as if they are the same system and the lead is just a formality. Then he saw Nadia. His pace changed. Not urgency, not the disruption of a bond, but something additional, something layered over the existing pattern. He moved toward her without pulling against the lead, just angling his body in her direction, until Cale followed his movement, and the 3 of them were standing together in the yard in the early morning cold. "He's been waiting since 6, Cale said. "I got here at 6:55, Nadia said. "I know," he said. "I could tell from his behavior when the car was in the lot." She thought about that. "He can hear my specific car from inside his enclosure." "Yes," Cale said. She looked at Fenrir. Fenrir looked at her with simple, uncomplicated happiness, the happiness of a creature that has everything it currently wants in one place, and is very pleased about it. "Shall we?" Cale said. They walked. The first few minutes were managed primarily by Owen and Pete, who were doing their professional jobs of observing and monitoring, and staying at a distance that was useful without being intrusive. Nadia walked beside Cale, and Fenrir walked on Cale's other side, and then gradually Fenrir shifted so that he was between them, and the arrangement became the 3 of them moving together through the eastern grounds with the tree line on their left and the low winter light on everything. She noticed things on this walk that she had not noticed about the grounds before, because walking through a place is different from working in it. She noticed the way the frost was still on the grass in the shadow of the tree line while the open meadow was already clear. She noticed a section of the fence along the eastern boundary that had new posts, recently replaced, the wood still pale against the weathered gray of the older posts beside them. And she noticed that Fenrir moved his head as they walked, not frantically, but constantly alert, taking in everything, noting the small things that were different from yesterday, and the things that were the same. "Does he do this every day?" she asked. "The walk." "Most days," Cale said. "He has an enclosure period in the morning and then an exercise period, and in the evenings he has free time in the yard. He needs the space. He's not an animal that can be kept in an enclosure full time." "None of them are," she said. "No," he agreed. They walked. Fenrir paused to investigate something near the base of an old oak tree, taking his time, his nose working with the focused attention of an animal that experiences the world primarily through scent. Cale waited without impatience. Nadia watched the wolf and thought about patience. She thought about 6 years of mornings like this, A man and a wolf, and the grounds and the cold air. A routine built from real care and consistency. This is the part you chose, she said. He looked at her. The daily routine, she said. You could have assigned this to the handler team. I could have, he said. But you didn't. No. He was quiet for a moment. Fenrir had finished his investigation and resumed walking, and they moved with him. When I first took over management of the estate, I was trying to do everything right in ways that could be measured and evaluated. The financial health of the sanctuary, the welfare standards, the documentation protocols, all of it needed to be better than it had been, and I put a lot into making it better. He paused. But there is a category of thing that matters that can't be measured, and I was so focused on the measurable things that I almost missed that category entirely. What brought you back to it? She asked. Him, he said, without looking at Fenrir, as if it was understood. He is not interested in the measurable things. He does not care about funding reports or welfare ratings or governance. He cares about whether I am present, not just in the space, actually present. He looked at the wolf. He is a very good teacher. She thought about this for the length of 3 ordinary steps. What did you learn? He considered the question with the seriousness she had come to expect from him. That showing up consistently, without an agenda, is its own kind of communication, he said. That animals, and people, need to see that you are there, before they can begin to trust that you will continue to be there. The tree line curved and opened into the meadow, and the low morning sun came at them from the east, full in their faces for a moment, and they both squinted and adjusted, and Fenrir put his nose up and tasted the air, and his tail moved in a slow, satisfied arc. He's happy, she said. Yes, Kale said. She looked at the wolf. She looked at the man. She thought about what he had just said, showing up consistently, without an agenda. She thought about the walks he had taken thousands of mornings without anyone tracking them or evaluating them, or adding them to an archive on the break room wall. She thought about the quality she had been trying to name in him since the first meeting in the main office, the quality that was not performance, and she thought that maybe she had found the name for it. He was a person who did things because the things mattered, not because anyone was watching. She had been looking for that quality her entire adult life, in herself and in other people, and finding it was rare enough that when she found it in someone else she felt it like a key in a lock. Not a grand dramatic recognition. A small, precise, certain click. They turned at the far end of the meadow and started back toward the main grounds, and Owen and Pete fell in a little ahead of them to check the return path, and for a stretch of maybe 10 minutes they were essentially walking alone, the 3 of them, the wolf between them with his head high and his pace easy, and the estate around them and the cold morning air, and the sound of their footsteps on the frost-edged grass. She did not say what she was thinking. She was still gathering, still careful, but she let herself feel the click, fully, the way she let herself feel any piece of information that was reliable. She did not minimize it, or redirect it, or file it away to examine later. She just walked. And the wolf beside her walked with his warm flank, occasionally brushing against her hand, and the man on the other side of the wolf walked with his face slightly turned toward her, not staring, just attentive, the way he was attentive to everything that he had decided mattered. And the morning continued to be exactly what it was, cold and clear and fully real, without any agenda at all. She found the paper on a Thursday night. It was not in any of the sanctuary's official documentation. It was in a journal she had not looked at before, an older publication from the late 90s that had focused on interspecies behavioral studies, with an emphasis on canid and human bonding patterns. She had been working through a reading list that Dr. Ford had recommended, and this paper was near the bottom of the list under the heading, Supplementary Context, Historical Perspective. She had almost skipped it. The language in the abstract was dry, and the formatting was the kind that told you it was written before anyone thought much about making science accessible. She read it anyway because she read everything on her lists. The paper was called Secondary Attachment in Socially Bonded Canids, Observations on Non-Primary Human Selection Events. It was 42 pages long. The core observation, drawn from a study of 12 bonded wolf and human pairs over 15 years, was this. In 11 of the 12 cases, the bonded wolf eventually formed a secondary attachment outside of the primary pair. In every single one of those 11 cases, the secondary attachment person was someone the primary human considered, in the words of the paper, a person of significant personal interest. In 9 of the 11, the wolf's secondary attachment preceded any formal acknowledgement of the human-to-human relationship by weeks or months. In 3 cases, the secondary attachment preceded it by more than a year. The paper's authors were careful about their language. They did not make claims about wolves having insight into human emotion that went beyond what the evidence could support. They noted the small sample size, they noted the possible confounding variables, and then, in the final paragraph of the conclusion, the lead author, whose name was Dr. James Elton, wrote something that Nadia read 3 times before she put the paper down. He wrote, "We propose, tentatively and with full acknowledgement of the limitations of this data, that the bonded wolf's secondary attachment behavior may represent a form of social signaling within the wolf's extended relational world. The wolf does not choose arbitrarily. The patterns in our data suggest that the secondary choice is consistent, across 11 cases, with the primary human's own unacknowledged or unexpressed relational orientation. The wolf, in other words, may see clearly what the humans involved are still finding their way toward seeing." She put the paper down. She sat in her flat at her kitchen table and she looked at the wall for a while. The wolves see clearly what the humans are still finding their way toward seeing. She thought about the day she met Fenrir. She thought about his head in her lap, the weight of it, the quality of the decision in it. She thought about the day she met Kale, the particular quality of his attention, the 2-second pause before he spoke. She thought about 36 mornings of walks and 36 evenings of emails and the growing weight of something she had been very carefully not labeling. She thought, Fenrir knew before I knew. She thought, possibly Fenrir knew before Kale knew. She thought, that is either the most remarkable thing about animals, or the most remarkable thing about feelings, that one of them can see the other clearly, before the people involved can see it themselves. She did not write this in her notebook immediately. She sat with it the way she sat with important information, letting it find its proper weight, letting it stop feeling like a surprise and start feeling like something confirmed. Then she opened her notebook and wrote the paper title, the author, and the publication date. Below it she wrote the sample size and the key finding, and below that she wrote 11 of 11, and below that, after a long pause, I think that makes 12. She closed the notebook. She did not send the paper to Kale that night. She was not sure yet what she wanted to say alongside it. She slept on it. She slept on it the next night too. She read the paper again on Saturday morning, which was a day she was at the sanctuary for the morning only, and during her afternoon hours at home she walked through it once more with a highlighter, and found that every section she was highlighting was a section about the secondary attachment, about the pattern of the wolf's choice, about the way the animal's behavior communicated something the humans in the study had not been ready to communicate themselves. She thought about Greta's archive on the break room wall. She thought about Claire adding dates. She thought about Owen standing in her doorway trying to find words for something he understood clearly but didn't know how to say. She thought about the way Kale stood at the fence on Saturday mornings with no professional reason to be there, and the way he had said, on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, that he was processing something slowly and accurately, and the way he had seemed, in saying that, to be extending something toward her that was the exact same thing she kept in her notebook, the honest uncertainty, the willingness to say I don't know yet but I'm not stopping. She found herself at her desk with the paper in front of her and her laptop open, and before she had fully decided to do it she was typing an email. She wrote, "There's a paper I think you should read. I'm attaching it. The key section is pages 37 to 39, but the full context is worth having. You don't need to respond until you've thought about it." She attached the paper. She looked at the email for a moment. She added, at the end, "The title is self-explanatory," and then she sent it, before she could revise it into something safer. She got up and made tea and stood at the kitchen window and watched the street outside and waited. The reply came in 23 minutes. She was on her second cup of tea. It said, "I've read it." She typed, "All 42 pages in 23 minutes?" He replied, "I read the abstract, then the conclusion, then pages 37 to 39, then the full paper." She typed, "That's fast." He replied, "Some of it I had already read." She put the mug down. She typed, "You found the same paper?" He replied, "Dr. Ford mentioned it in our conversation about the secondary attachment protocol. I tracked it down 2 weeks ago." She sat with this for a moment. Then she typed, "Why didn't you say anything?" The pause before his reply was longer than his previous ones. She counted 32 seconds. She was not watching the clock. She simply found herself counting. His reply, "I wasn't sure how to, and I wanted to be certain of what I thought before I brought it to you. You deserve accuracy." She read that sentence 3 times. You deserve accuracy. The same thing she demanded of herself, offered back to her as a gift. She typed, "And now, are you certain?" Another pause, 28 seconds. His reply, "Not fully, but enough. Enough to stop waiting." She looked at that. She read it twice. She set the phone down and looked at her notebook on the table, closed, her pen on top of it. She thought about 11 of 11. She thought about 12. She thought about what it meant to stop waiting, and she thought about how long she had been good at waiting, how much of her life she had spent in the patient gathering of information before acting, and how there was a version of that habit that was wisdom and a version that was fear dressed up as caution, and how she had spent a significant portion of the last 6 weeks wondering which version she was practicing. She picked up the phone. She typed, "Then come for a walk tomorrow morning." Not the structured one, just a walk, 7 o'clock. She sent it. She did not look at the screen for 45 seconds. When she did, his reply was already there. It said, "Yes." One word. She thought about the quality of it. She thought about how a person who says yes cleanly, without softening it or complicating it or adding conditions, is a person who means yes all the way through. She thought about how rare that was. She wrote it in her notebook. She wrote the word yes, and she drew a small circle around it, and she did not feel foolish about doing so. Sunday morning was cold again, but differently cold. The kind of cold that comes with a clear sky and a certainty that the day will be warmer by noon. She arrived at 6:55, not because she needed to be early. She had stopped pretending she wasn't early on purpose. He was already there. He was standing near the gate to Fenrir's enclosure with his hands in his coat pockets, and Fenrir was on the other side of the fence, not sitting, standing, as if he too had known this morning was different and had decided to be appropriately alert for it. When Nadia came across the yard, the wolf's whole body shifted, that long deliberate arc of attention, from the gate to her and then back to Cale as if checking that the other piece was in place. She stopped a few feet away and looked at Cale, and he looked at her, and they were simply two people standing in the early morning on a piece of ground that had become, over 6 weeks of daily presence, familiar in the specific way a place becomes familiar when it is where important things happen. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. They stood there for a moment. Behind the fence, Fenrir made the low sound, the marking attention sound, and they both looked at him. "He looks pleased," she said. "He's been pleased since you arrived," Cale said. "I can always tell from his posture." She looked at the wolf. She thought about the paper. She thought about 11 of 11. She said, without planning to say it but trusting the moment, "He knew before we did." "Yes," Cale said. "He did." She looked at him. He was watching her with that quality of attention she had spent 6 weeks learning, the one that was not performance, that cost something and was given anyway, and she held the look for the length of a real breath, not a professional breath but an actual one. "Shall we?" she said. He opened the enclosure gate and Fenrir came out, calm and certain, and took his place between them, and they walked. She did not document this walk. Some things are not for the record. Some things are for the person who lives them, to be carried whole and undiluted, not broken into data points and filed in the correct location. She would document what mattered, what needed documenting. She would be accurate and thorough, and she would continue to question her own conclusions at every stage, because that was who she was. But this morning, this particular morning with the cold, clear sky and the frost on the meadow and the wolf between them moving with all the satisfaction of something that has arranged the world exactly as it wished, she did not take notes. She walked. She talked. She listened. She felt the specific quality of a morning that is the beginning of something, not announced by anyone, not labeled, just present and real, and asking nothing more than that you be present and real inside it. Fenrir walked between them and the estate spread out around all three of them, and the winter light came in at an angle that made everything sharp and clear, and there was no ambiguity in any of it, not in the wolf's contentment, not in the way Cale walked, not in the small warm space where her understanding of the paper and his 23-minute reading time and his one-word reply, and her circled yes in the notebook, all lived together without needing to be explained. 12, she thought, that makes 12. And then she let herself stop counting and just walked. The storm came on a Thursday without much warning. There had been a weather advisory that morning, the kind that uses careful language about wind speeds and expected precipitation, and advises caution, which is different from the kind that tells you to stay home, and so no one had stayed home. The sanctuary had run its morning schedule. The walks had gone out, the feeding rounds had been completed, the health checks had been done. By early afternoon the clouds had built themselves into something serious, and the light had gone the particular flat gray of a sky that has stopped being a sky and started being a ceiling. Nadia was in the middle of filing week 7 documentation when the rain started. It came in fast, the way storms do when they have been building all day, Not beginning with light drops and escalating gradually but arriving at full volume. The kind of rain that hits the window like it has something to say. She saved her work and looked outside. The yard was already running with water. The tree line was moving in the wind. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Owen. Fenrir not responding to the call-in. He went to the East Run this morning and didn't come back. Just a heads up. She looked at the message. She looked outside at the rain. The East Run was the large outside area connected to the main enclosure by a second gate, a stretch of natural ground that Fenrir used for his solo roaming time, dense with mature trees that gave good shelter. He almost certainly had shelter. He had gone through worse weather than this and found the overhang near the eastern wall of the enclosure, a deep ledge of old stonework that kept him completely dry in most rain conditions. She should not worry. She pulled on her waterproof coat. She told herself she was going to check the East Run fence for storm damage, which was a legitimate task and also the truth. And she also told herself she was going there because she needed to see for herself, which was another truth. And she did not try to reconcile the two because she was in a hurry and the rain was heavy. She crossed the yard at a pace that was slightly faster than professional, her coat hood up, the rain hitting hard enough to make a noise on the waterproof fabric. The yard was empty. Everyone else had gone inside when the weather turned, which was the sensible decision. She went through the side gate and down the path to the East Run. Fenrir was not under the stone overhang. He was standing in the rain. She stopped at the fence. He was in the middle of the East Run, absolutely still, getting completely soaked, and he was looking at her, not at the overhang, not at the stone ledge that was 12 feet away and bone dry. At her. She stood at the fence and looked at him. "You have shelter," she said. "Right there." He looked at her. 12 feet, she said. "You can see it from where you're standing." He looked at her in the way he looked at her when he had decided something and was waiting for the people around him to catch up. She recognized this look by now. It was a specific look. It was the look of an animal that is not confused about the situation and is not, in fact, standing in the rain because it has forgotten where shelter is. She was wet. Her boots were wet. The rain was running down the back of her neck despite the hood because the wind had picked up and was driving the rain at an angle the hood was not designed for. "This is not," she said to the wolf, "a reasonable thing to do." He sat down in the rain, calmly, deliberately, with the air of an animal that has made a considered decision and is comfortable with it. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned around. Kale was crossing the path from the direction of the main building, and he was holding something, and when he got close enough she could see it was a waterproof jacket, folded, not yet put on. He was already wet across the shoulders. He had been out long enough for the rain to get through his coat, which told her he had been moving fast. He stopped beside her. He looked at Fenrir, who was sitting in the rain with his fur plastered flat and his winter sky eyes bright. He looked at Nadia, who was soaked down the back of her neck and standing at the fence with the expression she usually kept for situations that were professionally complicated. He looked back at Fenrir. "He can see the overhang," he said. "Yes," she said. "He's choosing to sit in the rain." "Yes," she said. Kale looked at the wolf for a long moment. Something was happening in his face that she could read now, after 7 weeks, with a reasonable degree of accuracy. Something that was not quite exasperation and not quite amusement, and was mainly, she thought, the expression of a person who has spent 6 years being genuinely surprised by one wolf, and has recently come to understand that the surprises are not random. He wanted company in the rain, Kale said. She thought about this. He wanted someone to come out in the rain, she said. Not quite the same thing. He looked at her. No, he said, not quite. He held the jacket out to her. She looked at it. She was already wet. The jacket was, at this stage, more symbolic than practical. She took it anyway, because the gesture was real and she did not believe in declining real gestures. She put it around her shoulders. His hands were at the collar for a moment, adjusting, and he did not let go of it right away. The rain came down. The wind moved through the tree line. Fenrir sat in the middle of his run, as wet as anything she had ever seen, with his tail doing the slow, satisfied arc that meant he was precisely where he wanted to be, and the situation was exactly what he had intended. He's fine, Kale said. He'll come in when he's ready. I know, she said. You came anyway. Yes, she said. He looked at her in the rain. She looked at him. There was something in the moment that she had been slowly building the language for over 7 weeks, the specific quality of a moment between two people who have been honest with each other and are now standing in the fact of that honesty, without any of the usual buffers, no agenda, no professional framing, no topic to discuss except the one that has been the only real topic since the beginning. "I've been thinking about what I said," he said. "About being practiced." "You said you weren't," she said. "I'm not," he said. "But I've been thinking that unpracticed is not the same as unwilling." He looked at her. I wanted to say that clearly. She thought about 11 of 11 and a circled yes in her notebook, and 23 minutes and one clean word that meant all the way through. She thought about Thursday morning walks and the feel of the estate in winter light and the particular quality of attention that cost something and was given anyway. "I know," she said. "You've been very clear." "Have I?" he said. "Yes," she said. "You've been clearer than you think." The rain came down between them and the wolf sat in it, completely satisfied. And she was aware of the jacket around her shoulders with his hand still at the collar, and she was aware of the cold and the wet and the wind in the trees, and she was also aware, with the particular clarity that comes to careful people in moments when they stop being careful, that she was not afraid of this. She had thought she might be. She had a history of being afraid of moments like this, moments where she could not see fully around the corner, where the information was incomplete, where something was being asked of her that she could not have answered perfectly even with unlimited time to prepare. She was not afraid. She was standing in the rain outside a wolf enclosure with a jacket around her shoulders that did not fit her, and she was not afraid at all. "His plan is working," she said, looking at Fenrir. "His plan has been working since week 1, Kale said. "He had a plan in week 1? "He had a plan," Kale said, "before week 1. I think he had a plan the moment you walked into the enclosure." She thought about that. She thought about a health check and a clipboard and an enormous silver wolf who walked across the grass and put his head in her lap without asking, without testing, without any of the gradual approach that every behavioral model predicted, just chose and acted on the choosing, in the particular way of creatures that do not second-guess themselves. "I wish I could do that," she said. It came out before she had decided to say it. She let it stay. "What?" he said. "Choose something and just..." She paused. "Go straight to it. Without all the gathering." He was quiet for a moment. "You went straight to me today," he said. "In the rain." She thought about this. She thought about the way she had put on her coat without debating it, the way she had gone across the yard and down the path to the east run without calculating whether it was the right thing to do. She had just gone. "I did," she said. "That's choosing," he said. "That's going straight to it." She looked at him. He looked back. The rain was still coming. Fenrir had not moved. His tail was still making the slow arc. "This wolf," she said, "is going to be insufferably pleased with himself." "He already is," Kale said. She let herself laugh, and it came out real and unguarded, and he heard it, and something shifted in his face, something that had been careful loosened slightly, and he was still holding the jacket collar, and the rain was still coming, and neither of them moved to go inside. "We should probably get out of the rain," she said. "We should," he agreed. He did not move. "At some point," she said. "At some point," he agreed. Fenrir stood up. He shook himself with the extraordinary efficiency of an animal that has been wet by its own choice, and has now decided that enough is enough, and he walked to the gate. He sat beside it. He looked at them both. "He's ready to go in," she said. "He got what he came for," Kale said. She looked at the wolf. She looked at the man. The jacket was still around her shoulders. The rain was still coming. And she thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that for a situation with no established protocol, no precedent in the behavioral literature, and no clean professional category, it was going remarkably well. She would write it up later. She would find the right words, the precise ones, the ones that reported what happened, without telling the reader what to feel. But right now she just stood in the rain while the wolf shook himself dry, and the man beside her didn't let go of the jacket collar, and she let the moment be exactly what it was. Everything. She had been building up to the conversation for 10 days. Not visibly. She was not the kind of person who broadcast that she was building up to something. She continued her work at the same level of focus and thoroughness she always had. She did the morning rounds, the health checks, the behavioral documentation, the walks. She answered emails. She attended the Friday protocol meeting. She had dinner with Claire on Wednesday, which had become a habit somewhere around week 5, without either of them formally proposing it. And they talked about sanctuary work and local politics, and a book Claire had been reading about bird migration, and Nadia said nothing about the conversation she was building toward. She was building toward it because she believed in saying the things that mattered, and because she had reached the point where not saying it was beginning to require more effort than saying it would, and because 7 weeks and a rain-soaked Thursday, and a paper about secondary attachment in bonded wolves had accumulated into something that deserved to be said out loud between two people, rather than held privately and carefully by each of them separately. She had drafted the conversation in her notebook, not in the way of scripting, but in the way she drafted everything important, finding the right shape of the words before she needed to produce them. She wrote, "I know what I think this is. I know what I want. I'm not saying this to ask for anything from you. I'm saying it because I think you deserve to know it plainly." She wrote this version, crossed out 2 words, wrote it again, and then read it back and decided it was accurate. She did not memorize it. She trusted herself to say what she meant when the moment came. She always had. The moment came on a Sunday morning, not because she had engineered Sunday morning. It arrived the way the right moments often arrive, not announced, without a cue, emerging from the ordinary material of a regular day. They had finished the morning walk. Owen had peeled off with Pete at the eastern meadow to check the far fence line, which meant the last quarter mile back to the main buildings was just Nadia, Cale, and Fenrir, as it had been on various Sundays over the past 4 weeks, and the rhythm of it was familiar now, the 3 of them moving through the cold morning with the particular ease of people, and an animal who have been doing this long enough to have stopped being aware of how they move together. Fenrir had slowed near the main gate, investigating something near a stone post with the dedicated attention he brought to any unfamiliar scent. They had stopped, naturally, beside him, and they were standing in the pale winter light with their breath misting, and the estate was quiet around them, and the moment settled like the rest of the morning had settled, gently, completely, without drama. She said, "I want to tell you something." He looked at her. "I know what I think this is," she said. "Between us. I've known for a few weeks. I've been taking my time about saying it, not because I'm uncertain, but because I wanted to be sure I was saying it well." He was very still, not tense, just present. "I think I care about you," she said. "Not gradually, and not by accident. I think it happened fast, and I think Fenrir knew before either of us. And I think the reason I trust it is that everything leading up to it has been honest. You've been honest with me. I've been honest with you. And honesty makes a solid foundation for caring about someone." She paused. "That's what I wanted to say. I'm not asking you to respond right now if you need time. I just needed it to exist in the air between us, rather than only in my notebook." There was a silence, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that has weight, because what was said had weight. Fenrir lifted his head from his investigation of the stone post and looked at both of them with the calm, interested attention of a creature watching something important happen and understanding what it is. Cale said, "I don't need time." She looked at him. "I've had time," he said. "I've had 7 weeks, and I've been thinking about what to say to you since the 2nd week, and I've revised it in my head approximately the same number of times you revised things in your notebook, and what I keep arriving at is the same thing you just said." He held her gaze. "I think I care about you in a way that I haven't cared about anyone in a long time, possibly in a way that I haven't cared about anyone ever. And the reason I trust it is the same reason you trust it, because it's been built on honesty, and not on any of the things that don't hold." She took this in. She did not rush the taking in. "You don't perform," she said. "I try not to," he said. "You don't tell me what you think I want to hear." "I've tried to tell you what's true," he said. "Even when I wasn't sure of the truth, I told you when I wasn't sure." "I know," she said. "That's part of it. That's part of why I trust it." He looked at her in the way she had been seeing since the 1st week, and had slowly understood was not a professional look, had never been a professional look, was the look of someone paying the specific quality of attention that is not about evaluating or managing but about understanding. "You told me," he said, "that honesty makes a solid foundation for caring about someone. I believe that," she said. "So do I," he said. "And I want to tell you that I have been aware, since the 1st week, that something important was happening, and that my way of handling it, which was to find professional reasons to be near it, was not my best work." She almost smiled. "It was transparent," she said. "It was extremely transparent," he said. "I'm aware. I was using the only tools I had for a situation I didn't have a category for." "I know," she said. "I was doing the same thing. I was putting everything in the reports. I read all the reports." "I know you did." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," she said. "Are you happy here?" She had not expected this question. She absorbed it. She thought about the days since she arrived, the work and the mornings and the slow process of learning a place and the people in it, the cold air and the walks and the weight of Fenrir's head in her lap, and the particular quality of 6:21 in the morning emails and one-word replies and circled words in notebooks. "Yes," she said. "I'm happy here." "Good," he said, because I want you to stay. Not because of Fenrir, although Fenrir is clearly not going to accept any other outcome, and not because you're excellent at your work, which you are. I want you to stay because this place is better with you in it, and so am I. She stood in the cold morning light with this man who had been honest with her from the beginning and was being honest with her now, about the work and about himself, and about what he felt and what he wanted. No hedging, no deflection, just the plain statement, given directly, the way she gave everything she said that mattered. She thought, I have been looking for this, not this exact situation, not a winter morning outside a wolf enclosure, but this exact quality of being spoken to like a person who can handle the truth and deserves it. I want to stay, she said. It was that simple, and that real. Fenrir stood up from his investigation of the stone post and walked between them, and then continued toward the enclosure gate with the unhurried certainty of an animal whose work is done. He did not look back. He did not need to look back. They fell into step behind him, the two of them. Not quite together yet, but close enough that the distance was only a matter of a small step that neither of them had taken, and both of them had already decided to take. The morning was cold and clear and completely itself, and the estate stretched out around them in all directions, and somewhere in the archive on the break room wall, if Greta had gotten there first on a Sunday, there was probably a new entry being added. Nadia did not mind. She had stopped minding a long time ago. She walked, and the wolf walked ahead of them, and the man beside her said, the funding meeting is on Tuesday if you have time, and she said, I can make time, and they were back to work, and to the ordinary things, which was exactly where she wanted to be, inside the ordinary things, with this person, who made the ordinary things feel like they mattered. Which was, she had learned, the only real test of anything, not the grand moments, not the rain and the jacket and the papers read in 23 minutes. Those things mattered, yes. But what mattered most was how a person was on a regular Tuesday morning when there was nothing to perform and no audience, and just the work and the coffee and the careful, honest conversation about what needed doing. She already knew the answer to that test. She had known it since the second week. She had just taken her time about saying so, which was, she thought, watching Fenrir walk through his gate with the satisfied composure of something that has arranged the world to its satisfaction, entirely the right approach. Some things were worth gathering data on, and some things, when the data was complete, you simply said out loud. The overnight observation room became Nadia's by a process so gradual that it was impossible to say when it happened. The room existed for veterinary necessity, a space at the back of the main sanctuary building where animals under close monitoring could be checked through the night without removing them from familiar surroundings. It had a narrow window facing the enclosures, a cot against the wall, a desk with a lamp, and a small shelf that had held, when Nadia first saw it, nothing but a stack of old monitoring logs and a broken thermometer. In week 3, she had put her extra stethoscope on the shelf. In week 5, she had added a water kettle and a small tin of tea bags. In week 8, after a late observation period that ran past 9 at night and made driving home impractical, she had stayed in the room and found that it suited her in the particular way rooms suit certain people, the quiet, the proximity to the work, the particular darkness of a building after hours when the only sounds are natural ones. After that, she stayed late more often. Not every night, 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. She brought her notebook. She brought the book she was currently reading, which was not about animal behavior or veterinary science, but was a novel she had been meaning to get to for a year, and which she was reading slowly, the way she did things she wanted to last. She did not tell Cale she had started treating the room as a second home. She did not hide it either. It was simply what it was, an organic development in a situation that kept developing organically, one thing leading to the next in the unhurried way of things that are going in the right direction. He found out on a Wednesday. He came to the sanctuary at 7:15 in the morning, which was slightly earlier than usual, and walked across the yard to the main building, and saw her light on in the observation room window. He stood outside for a moment, as she learned later when he told her, looking at the light. Then he went inside and knocked on the observation room door. She had been awake for 20 minutes and was on her first cup of tea, reading the novel with her legs crossed on the cot, and she said, "Come in," in the tone of someone who is settled and not startled, and he opened the door and stood in the doorway and took in the kettle and the shelf and the novel and her general presence in the room, as if she belonged there, which by this point she did. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. He did not say anything else for a moment. He was absorbing the room, the way she absorbed things, without rushing. Then, when did this start? Week 8, she said. It's week 10, he said. 2 weeks then, she said. It's quiet, I like it. He looked at the shelf, at the tea tin and the stethoscope, and the novel with its spine gently bent from being held open many times. I can have it properly furnished, he said, if you're going to be here regularly. The cot is fine, she said. The lamp is good. It doesn't need much. He looked at her. It needs a better shelf, he said. It's a perfectly adequate shelf, she said. It's been there since the 90s, he said. I can see 3 different coats of paint and something that might be a filing system from a previous century. She considered the shelf. He was not wrong. A better shelf would be fine, she said. The shelf appeared on Friday. It was a real shelf, solid wood, mounted at a height that worked for the desk and the window and the way the room was laid out, as if someone had thought about how the room was actually used before deciding where to put it. She stood in the room and looked at it and then looked at the man who had evidently thought about how the room was actually used before deciding where to put it and did not say anything for a moment. Thank you, she said. It was the 90s shelf, he said. It bothered me. She looked at the shelf, and she looked at him, and she thought, this is what he does. He pays attention to the actual thing. He does not arrive with a solution looking for a problem. He looks at the problem first, and then finds the solution that fits. She had been watching him do this for 10 weeks in every professional context, and it was consistent, and it was real, and it was one of the 3 or 4 things about him that she had written in her notebook in the section she kept for things that were not data, but that she wanted to have in writing anyway. On the nights she stayed, Fenrir knew. She did not know exactly how. His enclosure was adjacent to the main building, and she supposed it was the light from the window, or the sounds she made moving around in the room, or the fact that by now her presence anywhere on the estate had a pattern he had memorized the way he memorized everything that mattered to him. On the nights she stayed, he did not sleep in the main body of his enclosure. He settled in the corner closest to the observation room window and stayed there through the night. She had discovered this by looking out the window at 2 in the morning on the 3rd night she stayed, when she had gotten up for water and glanced outside, and there he was, a silver shape in the dark, settled and still and completely present. She stood at the window and looked at him. He looked back. She did not know what to say to a wolf at 2 in the morning when you have both been awake for no good reason except the comfortable quality of an ordinary night in a place where you belong. She did not say anything. She just stood at the window for a few minutes and let them be awake together, and then she went back to the cot and fell asleep almost immediately. The way you fall asleep when you feel safe, which is quickly and without effort. She told Cale about this the next morning, at the enclosure, during the morning observation. She told it factually, the way she told things. He listened. He looked at Fenrir, who was engaged in the morning's first serious investigation of the perimeter fence. He does that with me too, Cale said. When I'm here late, I used to work evenings in the main building, and he'd station himself at the corner of the enclosure nearest my window. He paused. I thought it was just a habit. I didn't know if he actually knew I was there, or if he was just choosing that corner. He knows, she said. I was at the window for several minutes and he tracked the movement. He knew I was there. Cale looked at Fenrir for a long moment. He keeps watch, he said. Yes, she said. He does. She thought about what it meant. A creature that kept watch over the people it had chosen, not because it was asked to, not because it was trained to, but because it was what it did, consistently, in the dark and the cold and the ordinary nights when no one was watching. She thought about how this was also what Cale did, in his own way. The early arrivals and the late departures and the attention to the actual thing and the real answers, and the 90s shelf replaced with a proper one. Keeping watch was a form of love, not the dramatic form, the consistent one. She thought that the consistent form was probably the more reliable one to look for. Greta had updated the archive on the break room wall around week 9 to include a new section. She had titled it, with the handwriting of someone who knew she was writing for posterity, Later Developments. Below this title she had added entries in chronological order that tracked, in Greta's characteristic combination of precision and personality, the developments of the previous 3 weeks. She had noted, for example, the new shelf in the observation room, proper wood, not flat pack. Someone thought about this, the fact that Fenrir had begun sleeping in the corner position on the nights Nadia stayed. Consistent behavior, 7 observed nights, 0 exceptions. And a Thursday morning when Owen had arrived at 7 and found both Nadia's car and Cale's car in the lot, and had been so surprised he had stood in the lot for 30 seconds before going inside. Owen had come to Nadia's office doorway that same morning. He had the expression of someone who has found something out, and is attempting to process it and be professional at the same time. "Good morning, Owen," she had said. "Good morning," he had said. "Both cars are in the lot." "Yes," she had said. "At 7, he had said. "Correct," she had said. He had stood in the doorway for a moment. "Is everything all right?" he had asked, in the tone of someone checking whether a situation requires professional response. "Everything is fine," she had said. "We were looking at the new behavioral documentation format, the one Claire proposed." "Right," he had said. He had clearly wanted to ask further questions. He had visibly stopped himself. He had said, "Okay then," in a tone that was attempting to be neutral, and had gone back to his work. She had thought about him for the rest of the morning with a kind of quiet fondness. He was trying so hard to be professional. He was also 26 and working at a place where, as he had once told her, he had come because he cared about the animals, and had stayed because he also cared about the people. That was a sentence she thought about sometimes. She thought it said something true about the sanctuary, that it was the kind of place where a 26-year-old handler could say that without it sounding unusual. On the Saturday of week 10, Claire brought tea to the observation room in the mid-morning, and sat in the chair by the desk and looked at the shelf and the notebook and the novel, and the established quality of the space that comes from regular occupation, and she said, "You're happy here?" Not a question. "Yes," Nadia said. "Good," Claire said. She drank her tea. "When I interviewed you," she said, "I thought, this is someone who will work very hard and very well, and I wondered if she'll stay, or if she'll find it too quiet after a while. Some people find it too quiet." "I don't," Nadia said. "No," Claire said. "I can see that." She paused. "Cale is." Another pause. Longer. She set the tea down. "He's been different," she said. "Since you came. He was always good at his work. He was always present. But there's a quality now." She looked for the word. "Settled," she said finally. "He's settled in a way he wasn't before." Nadia thought about settled. She thought about what it meant to have something in your life that you hadn't known was missing, and then suddenly you could see the shape of the absence because the thing that filled it was there. "I know the feeling," she said. Claire nodded. She picked her tea back up. "Good," she said again, which was apparently going to be the end of the conversation, because that was Claire, who said what she meant in the minimum viable words and considered the thing done once she'd said it. They sat in companionable quiet for a few minutes, looking out the narrow window at the enclosures and the morning. Fenrir was at the far end of his space, moving along the fence with the deliberate pace of an animal doing a morning inspection. He was at the corner nearest the observation room window when they were watching, and he paused there, and he looked at the window, and his tail moved in the slow arc. "He knows you're in here," Claire said. "He always knows," Nadia said. "Remarkable animal," Claire said. "Yes," said Nadia. "He is." She watched the wolf for a moment. She thought about what he had decided, 12 weeks ago, in the first 5 minutes of an ordinary health check that turned out not to be ordinary at all. She thought about the weight of his head in her lap and the particular quality of the stillness that had come over the enclosure and the way she had felt it, even then, even before she had any language for it, as something that was happening to her rather than something she was doing, a door opening from the outside. She was glad she had not stood in the doorway. She was glad she had walked through. Fenrir moved on with his inspection. The morning moved with him, and the observation room was warm and quiet and exactly the right size, and the shelf on the wall was solid and properly made and held everything she needed, and outside the narrow window the world was doing what it always did, continuing, patient and full, waiting for the people in it to notice what was already there. She noticed. She had been noticing for 12 weeks. She intended to keep noticing for a long time. Some things, she had found, only got clearer the longer you looked. 6 months from the morning Nadia Cole drove through the Ashford estate gates for the first time, she accepted a permanent position. This was not a dramatic event. There was no announcement. Cale sent her the revised contract by email on a Tuesday afternoon, and she read it at her desk in the main office, and she made 2 changes to the language in the professional development section, because the original wording was imprecise about scheduling, and she sent it back. He replied within an hour accepting both changes. She signed it electronically, saved the PDF, and sent a copy to her notebook file because she kept records of things that mattered, and went back to the behavioral documentation she had been working on before the email arrived. That evening, sitting in the observation room with the lamp on and the novel open beside her and her tea going cold because she had forgotten about it while writing notes, she thought about the 6 months. She thought about them the way she thought about everything, not with nostalgia, which was a feeling she had limited patience for, but with the clear-eyed attention she brought to anything she wanted to understand. She went through it like a data set. She looked for patterns. She looked for the things that had held and the things that hadn't, the things she'd gotten right and the things she'd understood only later, the points where the evidence had been clear and she'd taken her time anyway, and the points where she had moved faster than she usually moved and had found that the speed was warranted. What she had gotten right from the beginning, the work. She had understood the work immediately and done it well, and continued to do it better. The behavioral documentation for Fenrir now ran to 47 pages of observational data and had been cited by Dr. Ford in a paper she was preparing on secondary attachment in bonded canids. Nadia had been offered co-author credit. She was considering it. What she had gotten right after a period of being careful, the trust. She had taken 7 weeks before she told Cale what she thought. She did not think 7 weeks was too long. She thought it was exactly right. She had needed to know him that well before she was willing to speak. She had needed to see the consistency, the honesty, the way he was in the rain, and the way he was in a professional meeting, and the way he was at 6 in the morning with no agenda. And she had seen all of these things, and they had all been the same person, which was the only evidence that counted. What she had underestimated, how much she had been waiting for a place that felt like this. She had not known she was waiting. She had thought she was content with the way her life was organized, the work and the small flat and the notebook and the careful management of what she let in. She had not thought she was longing for anything, but longing and readiness are different, and she understood now that she had not been longing, she had been ready, and readiness is quieter, and it sometimes needs the right moment to become visible to the person who has it. Fenrir had been the right moment. She looked at the window. The enclosure was dark outside, lit by the small perimeter lights that stayed on through the night, and in the corner of the enclosure nearest the observation room, there was a silver shape that was Fenrir, settled in his usual position, keeping watch the way he always kept watch. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what he had done. She thought about it not as a series of events, the health check and the head in the lap and the fence and the parking lot and the corridor in the rain, but as a single sustained act. He had chosen her, and then he had refused to let the choosing be ambiguous, and then he had arranged the world, insofar as a wolf can arrange the world, so that the people involved could not avoid seeing what was already there. He had not calculated this. She was certain of that, or as certain as anyone can be about the interior processes of another species. He had not planned a campaign. He had simply done what he always did, seen clearly, decided, and acted on the decision without apology or delay. She thought about what that cost him. Nothing. It cost him nothing, because he had no mechanism for being embarrassed about his own instincts, no capacity for the second guessing that made human beings withhold their clearest truths and call it caution. He had simply been himself, fully and continuously, and the effect of it had been profound. She thought, I could learn from that. She thought, I have been learning from that. She was different now than she had been 6 months ago, and the difference was not large and it was not dramatic, and it would not be visible to someone who did not know her well. But to herself, turning it over carefully in the quiet of the observation room, it was clear. She was still careful, she still gathered data, she still took her time before saying important things. But the fear that had lived underneath the careful, the fear that made the gathering go on longer than it needed to, that made the saying harder than it should be, that fear was quieter now. It was not gone, but it was quieter. The door opened. She did not turn around. She knew the sound of the footsteps by now, the particular quality of them, the way they slowed at the door, the pause before he pushed it open. Cale came in with 2 cups, which she had also come to know, the slight weight difference between the door opening with 1 free hand and the door opening with 2 occupied hands. He set 1 cup beside her and kept the other, and sat in the chair by the desk, the one that had also become his by a process too gradual to pinpoint. You signed the contract, he said. I signed it 3 hours ago, she said. I know, he said. I've been thinking about it. What have you been thinking about it? She asked. He looked at his cup. That I'm glad, he said, and that I'm aware of how much it matters to me, and that being aware of that is not something I'm used to. She turned slightly to look at him. He looked back. Is that uncomfortable? She asked. He thought about it. No, he said. Strange, but not uncomfortable. Strange like it's new, she said. Strange like it's right, he said. New things often feel uncomfortable. Right things sometimes feel strange because you recognize them without having planned for them. She thought about this. She thought about the click she had felt in the meadow on the morning of week 4, the small, precise sound of something fitting into the right place. She had not planned for that. She had not had a category for it. It had simply been there, clearly itself, not requiring explanation. Yes, she said. I know that feeling. Outside the window, Fenrir lifted his head. Not an alert, not the posture of an animal that has heard something concerning. Just the small movement of a creature that is periodically checking that the things that matter are still where they should be. He looked at the window, let his gaze rest there for a moment, and then put his head back down on his paws. Nadia watched him. "He's doing the check," she said. "He does it every hour," Cale said. "When you're in this room. I've timed it." She looked at Cale. "You've timed it." "I've been here late on the nights you stay," he said. "Not every night, but several." "I timed it." She absorbed this. He had been here on late nights watching Fenrir's pattern, timing the intervals, carrying the knowledge of it without mentioning it because he was a person who gathered his own data and waited until the right moment to produce it. She felt a rush of something that was part amusement and part recognition, and part the specific quality of being known by someone who pays attention. "You and I," she said, "are very similar in some ways." "Yes," he said. "That could be a complication," she said. "Two people who take their time and hold things privately and gather data before acting." "It could be," he said. "Or it could mean we both understand why the other one works the way they do, which makes it easier to wait for each other." She thought about that. She thought about the 23 minutes and the 11 of 11 and the one clean yes, and the conversation at the gate in the cold morning where neither of them had said anything without meaning it. She thought about 7 weeks of mornings where he had been there, consistently, without agenda, doing what he had told her he understood from Fenrir, showing up because the showing up was its own communication. "It makes it easier to wait," she said. "Yes," he said. "And also," she said, "sometimes it makes one of us move faster than they usually would." He looked at her. "I put on my coat and went across the yard in the rain," she said. "I didn't calculate that, I just went." "I know," he said. "I watched you cross the yard." "From inside?" "I was heading to the east run anyway," he said. "But yes, I watched you go." She thought about him watching her cross the yard in the rain, heading for the same place she was heading. The two of them moving toward the same thing from different directions, because the thing at the center of it was sitting in the rain waiting for exactly this outcome. She thought about how that image, the two of them converging in the rain on an apparently impractical silver wolf who had more social intelligence than either of them wanted to admit, was probably the image she would hold when she wanted to remember what the beginning felt like. "Greta will add that to the archive," she said. "She already has," he said. "Owen told me. She titled it The Rain Event." She pressed her lips together against a smile that wanted to be more than a smile. "Of course she did." "She's also added the observation room shelf," he said, "under material evidence." She looked at the shelf, the solid wooden shelf that had appeared on a Friday, because someone had thought about how the room was actually used, before deciding how to improve it. "Material evidence of what?" she asked. "She didn't specify," he said. "She underlined it." She let herself smile, fully this time, and he watched her smile the way he watched most things about her, with the particular attention of someone who finds the thing they're watching worth the looking. She was used to this now. She was used to being looked at by him, and it no longer created any of the slight discomfort of early days, the awareness of being seen before she was sure she was ready. She was ready. She had been ready for a while. She just hadn't said so until she was. Outside the window, Fenrir was asleep, not doing his hourly check, not keeping watch, just asleep, his large body fully relaxed, his breathing even, his silver coat catching the low light from the perimeter lamps, and making him look, as he always looked in certain lights, like something ancient and deliberate, something that existed on a scale of time that made the human habit of hesitating look very small. She looked at him and thought about the paper she had found on a Thursday night, and the 42 pages and the 11 of 11, and the conclusion that said some things were clear to the animal before they were clear to the people. She thought about how right that had been, and how much she had resisted knowing it was right, and how the resistance had been the last and smallest piece of her fear, and how she had let it go, and been glad every day since. She thought about Dr. James Elton's careful sentence, "The wolf may see clearly what the humans involved are still finding their way toward seeing." She thought, "We found our way." She looked at Cale, who was sitting in the chair that had become his, drinking from the cup that had come to be his cup, in the room that had come to be her room, in the place that had become the place where her days were built, and she thought about how none of this was planned, and all of it was exactly right. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. "I'm not scared," she said, "of this, of how much it matters. I've been watching to see if the fear would come back, and it hasn't, and I wanted to say that because I think you should know." He was quiet for a moment. He set his cup down carefully. He looked at her in the way that had started everything, in the way that she now understood was not something he did casually or often, the full weight of his attention given because the thing in front of him had earned it. "I'm not either," he said. "I thought I would be. I have been before. But this is—" He stopped. He found the words the way he always found them, not quickly but rightly. "This is built on something real," he said, "and I trust what it's built on." "So do I," she said. Fenrir slept on. He had nothing further to do. He had arranged things to his satisfaction. The people he had chosen were in the same room, honest with each other, building something together on a foundation of actual truth, which was all he had wanted from the beginning. He was not a complicated creature. He had seen what he saw, decided what he decided, and acted with complete conviction. The results spoke for themselves. He slept in the quiet of the estate he had always known, in the corner he had chosen, in the company of the two people he had decided were his, and the night continued around him, patient and full and entirely itself, the way nights are when nothing needs to happen because everything that should have happened already has. Nadia closed her notebook. She had stopped needing to write quite so many things down, not because she had stopped noticing them, but because they had found another place to live, not in records and evidence and the careful language of documentation, but in the everyday fact of her days here, the morning walks and the evening rooms and the honest exchanges and the coffee that arrived at the right time from the right direction. Some things did not need to be noted because they were not data. They were simply what her life was now, and that, after all the gathering and all the careful honest thinking and all the waiting that had been the right kind of waiting, was exactly enough. It was, in every way that counted, everything.